Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to After the Buzzer. I am your host, Couper Moorhead, and we are talking about the Miami Heat's back-to-back home losses to the Minnesota Timberwolves by 2, to the Chicago Bulls by 5. We will talk about both those games in just a moment. We're going to try and keep it a little shorter tonight because, frankly, there have been better nights this season than this one. It was a tough loss in the end. The Heat gave up a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. And part of the reason why, bigger picture, that the Chicago loss hurts a little bit more. Minnesota's a Western Conference team. But because of Chicago, they're just below them in the standings. Chicago wins, Atlanta wins, Orlando wins. Miami came into the night the 7th seed. All three of those teams behind them. All three of those teams win. Miami ends the night the number 9 seed. The only bit of good news was that Detroit, in the 6th spot, who Miami is chasing, Detroit lost a nail-biter to the Golden State Warriors. That gap between 5 and 6, or 5 and the Heat right now is, the gap between Detroit and the Heat right now remains 5.5 games. It's better than 6.5 games if Detroit had won, but, that's going to be the longer we keep going, the less time, the fewer amount of games you have to make up that ground. So that 6th spot is getting, further and further in the distance as we move on. You're going to have to start making up some ground eventually to have a chance there. But, with the other teams winning, Miami is now right back into that 7, 8, 9 mix, and they're in the 9 spot. So if you're going to be in the play-in, you want to be in the 7th spot to have guaranteed 2 home games if you lose the first one. A lot of time left. We'll see where things go. Let's start with that Minnesota game, which was the return of the 3 and Z Heat. We have talked about them so many times over the years. I've written about it plenty, but when the Heat need a win against a team that's kind of can be overwhelming in talent or athleticism, they go to the zone. They go to the press that drops back in the zone, and they rely on getting the threes up at decent volume, but really they need the efficiency to kind of bolster their offense in a lot of these games. So that's why you got the threes and you got the Z, the zone. And it worked because it got Anthony Edwards to have a pretty poor game. It's just that enough Minnesota players around him, wound up finding the seams in the zone throughout. There was an important stretch in the third quarter where Minnesota really scored against the zone really well for about 5 minutes, and they went up, significantly, and it looked like the game was kind of starting to get away from the Heat. And then Spoelstra made the call, and it was a tough call to stay in the zone, which also meant staying in the press. Bam hits a big 3. They get 2 steals. It's an 8-0 run in about 22 seconds, and then they stay in the press zone for most of the rest of the game, other than a couple toggles back into man, just to change things up. So at the time, that was one of those adjustments where the best adjustment you make is not adjusting at all. Spo staying in the zone. They wound up using 43 possessions of zone, sixth most in any game in the NBA this season. And, eventually the Wolves found enough down the stretch. Bam was awesome that game, 29 points on 21 shots. He's been awesome for at least a month. His numbers had kind of been regressing back to career averages for over 2 months. But in the last month, he's like 60% on mid-range jumpers, upper paint, over 50%. I mean, he is just shooting the lights out. He has been Miami's anchor on both ends of the floor for a while now. But that Minnesota game is also one of those games that's tough to lose because, when Spoelstra is in post-game in a lot of these recent games after Minnesota, the other night after they almost won in Cleveland despite being out half the rotation, Spoelstra's in a lot of these post games saying he's encouraged, he sees the progress, he thinks that a breakthrough is coming just around the corner. And when you have games like that where you just barely lose to Minnesota, you just barely lose to Cleveland, you just barely lose to New York, like earlier this week in that other back-to-back home split, you see what he's seen and you believe him. It feels like there's so much positive things happening that if they can just put together better 5-minute stretches in fourth quarters, then there's going to be a run coming. But then you got games like Chicago. And I think Spoelstra put it best in postgame, where he reminded everyone about the positivity he had been putting out in the world after recent games, and then he said tonight, or the Bulls game, quite plainly was a regression.
I mean, we've been battling, for several games, and I really liked, a lot of the things that were going on, even in some of these losses. Today was a regression, for one night. We have the competitive character. We're going to bounce back, but we had some of these things bubble up again. We know what they are. Some of the missed shots, poor decisions offensively that would lead to, lack of focus defensively. We're at our best when it doesn't matter what's going on. We can defend and get multiple stops, and that kind of fuels our offense, fuels our confidence. We had a little bit of that bubble back into the game. Coming out of timeouts where we had a chance to push a lead to double digits, where they would come storming back. At halftime we didn't come out ready. I felt like that was, behind us. With that said, too, I felt like I didn't do a good job, with managing the minutes. I went into the game thinking that we need some speed and a little bit more of the energy boost, and we got to that lead, and so I thought, we would try to extend it, but I think, nobody in the locker room is going to make an excuse. Our main guys are not going to make an excuse about it, but I felt like there was, some fatigue in that fourth quarter. And if I could have gotten them a little bit more of a break, at some point during the game, I think we would have had enough of a boost, to finish this off. But that's on me, and that's, I have to do a better job for this team.
He used that word. I don't think he uses that word lightly. He wants to be positive, but very plainly he said this was a regression back into habits that they had at other parts of the season. One of those habits was that the team let their offense affect their defense. Early in the fourth quarter against Chicago, the Bulls started to mix in some zone. To be fair, a little bit of the Heat getting some of their own medicine that way. And the zone kind of discombobulated the Heat a little bit, but they still got quite a few open threes. They just weren't making hardly anything. Against Minnesota, they shot over 40%. But against the Bulls, they were down towards 30%. The Bulls did not shoot well from three either. They were sub 30%. And, that the zone got them out of sorts, and then the defense just kind of started eroding from there. The defense started out great against the Bulls. They weren't giving up anything in the paint, weren't giving up many clean drives or putting bodies on guys before the ball even kind of approached the paint. Not even if they weren't standing up drives, they were getting guys staying on their hips, contesting. It was what the Heat, sort of want to be on that end. But then as the game wore on in the second quarter, Matas Buzelis, who had that 10 of 10 game, that perfect game about a month ago against Miami, he started to get downhill. Then Josh Giddey started to get downhill a little bit. Kobe White had been bottled up for much of the game. Kobe White started to get downhill. In the fourth quarter, Trey Jones started to get into the paint a little bit, and then the Bulls started to speed things up. It's just a gradual loosening up of the game for Chicago. They started playing at their speed the more things wore on. And look, here's the number of the night. The Miami Heat allowed 66 drives to the Chicago Bulls. That is the most the Heat have given up this entire season. The Heat, their entire defense is structured around not letting the ball beat them in the paint. They do not want the ball driving, straight line drives especially, but if you're going to beat them in the paint, the defense wants you to have to make precision pinpoint passes, around weak side, swing it. They want to pinch guys in so the ball can't directly just kind of get into the paint, right? That's their entire philosophy defensively. That's why they don't give up a lot of drives. They give up like the sixth least drives in the league. They don't give up a lot of paint points because they cut off drives. They don't let the ball beat them when they're at their best, when things are operating as intended. But again, tonight, it started out well. Then as the game wore on, you end up giving up 66 drives. You end up getting outscored in the paint, and yeah, that's kind of how things went. Spo post game, he commented that again. The offense was affecting the defense in the fourth quarter when the Bulls came back. Bam Adebayo agreed. Bam said they let old habits creep in, habits that hadn't really been there for the last few weeks to a month or so. The Bulls game felt like a game the Heat had lost earlier in the season, even if the fourth quarter, because they gave up a lead, those kind of games have happened recently, but it hadn't happened quite like this, where it was the defense. And it wasn't just the offense having trouble; it was the defense not functioning the way Miami's defense is intended to. They're not supposed to give up straight line drives, and they were, and that's why they lost this game, even though Chicago did not shoot the ball very well. So, look, tough night for the Heat. They're still in the play-in mix. They're just not in the 7th seed anymore for right now. A lot of the season left. There's a month plus to go. That 6th spot where Detroit is starting to get a little dicey, but if they string together some wins, they're going to need some help from Detroit. Detroit's going to have to lose some along the way. Still within reach to get that playoff spot outright, but again, this is the narrowing in the Eastern Conference to that 7, 8, 9, 10 spots. We'll see where it goes from here. Hopefully there are some better days ahead. A rough one, but that's the NBA schedule. The games keep coming, and if you look at the rest of March, it's every other day or back-to-backs for pretty much the rest of March. So there's no time to think about losses like this for too long, because there's always another game around the corner, another chance to get a win. So that's all for tonight. We'll keep it short. I'm Couper Moorhead. Thank you for joining me for After the Buzzer, and we will see you very soon. Take care.